When the letter came, Ethan didn't expect it to change his quiet life forever. He had been living alone for years, working odd ranch jobs in the dusty corners of Texas. He was a man who didn't speak much, kept his hat low, and carried a soft sadness in his eyes that came from losing too much too early. The lawyer's note said his late uncle had left him a piece of land, a small, forgotten farm near the edge of an old valley. Ethan didn't remember much about that uncle, only that he was kind but lived far away, deep in solitude. With nothing tying him down, Ethan saddled his old horse and began the long ride to claim what little he had been given. The farm was not what he expected. The house looked worn, the fence half fallen, and the barn roof sagged like it had given up hope. Still, there was something about the wide open sky and the smell of the dry earth that felt like home. Ethan thought maybe this place could give him peace. Maybe here he could start over. He tied his horse by the old gate and walked through the dusty yard. The wind creaked through the porch boards as if whispering old secrets. He opened the front door slowly and froze. He wasn't alone. 3 young women stood in the hallway, frightened and pale. Their clothes were simple, their eyes wide as if caught doing something wrong. They looked tired, but one thing struck him immediately. Each of them was expecting a child. None of them spoke at first. The oldest among them, maybe in her early 20s, stepped forward, holding her belly gently as she looked at him. "Who are you?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. Ethan took off his hat. "Name's Ethan Cole," he said. "I just inherited this place. Didn't know anyone was here." For a moment there was silence except for the faint cry of a distant bird. The 3 girls exchanged nervous glances. Then the oldest said, "We live here." "Well, we have been staying here since your uncle passed. He helped us." Ethan's brows drew together. "Helped you?" She nodded. "We didn't have anywhere else to go. He gave us shelter, food, and said we could stay until our babies came." Ethan stood still, trying to make sense of it. His uncle had always been quiet and kind, but he never mentioned this. He looked at the girls again, one sitting down, another wiping her tears, all of them scared and unsure. He realized they weren't trespassers or thieves. They were just lost souls his uncle had taken under his wing. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well," he said slowly, "I'm not the kind to throw anyone out. I reckon we'll figure this out." Relief washed over their faces. The girl sitting by the old fireplace smiled faintly. "Thank you, mister," she whispered. That night, Ethan lit a small fire in the stove. The house was cold and smelled of old wood and dust, but it came alive with a faint warmth as the flames flickered. The girls told him their stories one by one. The oldest was Mary. She had been a schoolteacher in a small town before her fiancé left her when he learned she was expecting. Ashamed and alone, she had wandered until Ethan's uncle found her and offered her a room. The second girl was Clara, barely 20. She had come from a traveling family who left her behind when they moved west. She was quiet, soft-spoken, and carried her pain inside, never complaining. The youngest was Lila, just 17, with bright eyes that once must have been full of dreams. She said nothing about who the father of her child was, only that she had run away to escape a cruel home. Ethan listened in silence. He felt a heavy ache in his chest for them. They reminded him of all the lost things he had tried to bury, the loneliness of his own heart, the nights he wished someone had been there for him too. The next morning, Ethan went to check the barn. Inside he found old tools, a broken wagon, and a few chickens that had somehow survived. He rolled up his sleeves and began fixing what he could. By noon, Mary brought him coffee in an old chipped mug. She smiled shyly when he thanked her. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel empty. Days turned into weeks. Ethan worked hard repairing fences, mending the roof, and clearing the fields. The girls helped however they could. Mary cooked, Clara cleaned, and Lila tended the garden that was beginning to sprout again. Slowly, the old farm began to change. The air felt lighter, the rooms warmer. Laughter started returning to the house. One evening after supper, Ethan sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the hills in gold and red. Mary joined him quietly, resting her hand on her belly. "Your uncle used to sit here every evening, too," she said softly. "He said the land heals broken hearts if you let it." Ethan nodded. Maybe he was right. There was silence between them for a while, gentle and comfortable. Inside, the sound of Lila's humming drifted out through the open window. Clara was reading an old book to herself. For the first time, Ethan felt that the loneliness that had followed him for years was beginning to fade. But one night, trouble came. A man rode up to the house shouting Mary's name. He was drunk, angry, and wanted her back. Ethan stepped out, calm but firm, telling the man to leave. The girls watched from the porch, frightened. The man cursed and spat on the ground before riding away, promising he'd return. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He kept watch by the window, his old rifle resting on his lap, not to harm, but to protect. The next morning he told the girls, "No one's going to hurt you while I'm here." His words carried a weight they all felt. Over time, the farm became their world. Ethan taught them to ride horses, fix fences, and take care of the animals. They in turn brought warmth back to his life. When Mary went into labor one early dawn, Ethan panicked at first, but with Clara and Lila's help they managed. The baby's first cry echoed through the old farmhouse, filling it with life once again. Ethan looked at the newborn wrapped in a blanket, then at Mary's tired but smiling face. He realized something. Maybe this was what his uncle had meant to leave behind. Not just a piece of land, but a chance to build a family, a second life, a place where broken people could begin again. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the baby slept peacefully, Ethan sat on the porch once more. The wind brushed gently through the grass, carrying the scent of hope. He looked back at the farmhouse where laughter softly echoed and felt something he hadn't felt in years: belonging. The lonely cowboy who had come to claim an empty farm had found something far greater than he expected. He found purpose, kindness, and the fragile start of a family that wasn't tied by blood but by shared healing. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning of a story that would change all their lives forever. Weeks passed and the old farm turned into something close to a home. The once silent rooms now echoed with soft laughter and the gentle cries of Mary's newborn son. Ethan had never known the sound of a baby could make a place feel alive again. He helped where he could, fetching water, fixing broken furniture, and keeping the farm animals fed. Every evening, when the chores were done, he would sit by the window, watching the golden light fall across the fields and thinking how different his life had become in such a short time. Mary often joined him, her baby wrapped in a blanket. She would tell him how grateful she was that he had stayed and hadn't sent them away. Ethan only smiled and said, "Your uncle would have wanted it this way." But deep down, he knew it wasn't just about honoring his uncle anymore. He cared for them, not out of duty, but from a growing warmth he didn't know how to name. Clara, the quiet one, started coming out of her shell. She loved tending to the chickens and talking to the horses as if they could understand every word. Sometimes Ethan caught her laughing softly to herself in the barn, and he'd pause, listening. He realized the sound of laughter had become something precious to him. Lila, the youngest, was still shy but curious. She followed Ethan around the farm, asking questions about everything: how the plow worked, how to ride a horse, how to tell when rain was coming. Ethan answered patiently, like a big brother teaching someone who wanted to learn about life. Over time, she smiled more and even helped mend the fences with him, her small hands trying to keep up with his steady ones. But not everything was easy. Supplies ran low and the nearest town was half a day's ride away. Ethan decided to go himself, leaving the girls with his old rifle for safety. He rode into town one morning, bought flour, sugar, and baby clothes, and endured the curious looks of people who hadn't seen him there in years. Some whispered about the lonely cowboy who had disappeared, now back with stories of 3 women living on his land. He ignored them. Gossip couldn't touch what they were building together. When he returned, he found Clara in tears. The man who had threatened Mary before had come back, this time with 2 others. They shouted at the house, demanding Mary come out. But Clara had stood her ground, keeping the door locked until they finally left. Ethan's face grew pale with anger, not at her, but at the danger that had come so close to them. He promised again that no one would harm them, not while he was breathing. That night he sat outside watching the stars. The land stretched wide and silent, but he could feel the weight of his responsibility. He wasn't just a caretaker of the farm anymore. He was the protector of these lives that had somehow become part of his own. Winter crept in slowly. The wind grew colder and Ethan worked from dawn till dark, chopping wood and sealing the windows. Mary's baby grew stronger each day, and Clara's belly was round now, her child soon to arrive. Lila often hummed lullabies she remembered from her childhood, filling the cold nights with warmth. One morning, heavy snow began to fall, covering the fields in white. They all huddled inside, the fire burning bright. Ethan repaired an old cradle he found in the attic and painted it smooth. When he placed it beside the fire, Mary smiled and said softly, "You're not as lonely as you used to be, are you?" Ethan chuckled. "Guess I'm not." The days blended into each other. Clara gave birth in early spring, a quiet morning filled with nervous whispers and tears of relief when her baby girl cried out for the first time. Lila held her hand the whole time, and Ethan waited outside, his hands trembling. When Clara finally came out, pale but smiling, and showed him the baby, he couldn't speak. He only tipped his hat and said, "Welcome home, little one." The farm was no longer just a shelter, it was alive with new beginnings. There were now 2 babies, 2 mothers, and a third soon to come. Lila's time was drawing near, and though she was the youngest, she seemed the strongest. She spent long hours sitting under the big oak tree, whispering to the sky. One day Ethan joined her. "You miss your family?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Sometimes. But I think maybe I was meant to find this place. I don't feel lost anymore." Ethan looked out over the hills where green shoots were starting to break through the earth. "Me neither," he said softly. By summer, the farm had changed completely. The fields were planted again, the fences stood firm, and the barn had a new roof thanks to Ethan's tireless work. The women helped every day. They cooked, washed, and sang to the babies while Ethan worked outside. They had become something like a family, though none of them had planned it. One afternoon, a wagon came rolling down the dusty road. It was the lawyer who had first written to Ethan. He wanted to see how the property was being kept. When he saw the thriving farm, the repaired barn, and the happy faces inside, he smiled. "Your uncle would be proud," he said. "You've done something good here, son." Ethan nodded quietly. After the lawyer left, Mary placed her hand on his arm. "He's right," she said. "You've saved all of us, even if you don't know it." Ethan looked at her, then at the others sitting by the porch, and felt a deep peace settle in his heart. "Maybe you saved me too," he said. As time passed, word spread around town about the little farm in the valley where a lonely cowboy had built a home for 3 lost women and their children. People came to buy vegetables, eggs, and milk and left with smiles. They saw something there that money couldn't buy, a place full of kindness, where no one was judged and everyone belonged. Lila's baby came in late summer, on a warm night with fireflies floating outside the window. Ethan helped bring in water and held the newborn in his big hands when she was finally born. She was tiny and perfect, her eyes bright like morning light. Lila looked up at him, tired but smiling. "She's home now," she whispered. Ethan couldn't find the words. He just nodded, his throat tight with emotion. The seasons turned and the farm grew rich again. There was laughter in every room, the sound of children's footsteps and the smell of bread baking each morning. Ethan would often ride his horse along the fields at dawn, the sun rising behind him, knowing the people he cared for were safe and waiting back home. Years later, the townsfolk still spoke about the cowboy who inherited a broken farm and turned it into a place of hope. No one really knew the full story, how it began with loneliness and ended with love, not the kind written in fancy letters, but the kind made of small acts of care, quiet understanding, and shared strength. Ethan never married any of the women. They didn't need to. What they built together went beyond names and papers. They were family because they had chosen to stand by each other when no one else did. One evening, many years later, Ethan sat again on the same porch where it all began. The land stretched golden before him, children's laughter echoing in the distance. Mary, Clara, and Lila sat nearby, sewing and talking softly. The house glowed in the sunset, warm and alive. Ethan smiled, tipping his hat back as the wind carried the scent of the fields. He thought of his uncle, of the day he first arrived, and of how life had changed. He had come to an old forgotten farm looking for a place to rest, but instead, he had found something far greater. He had found a reason to live. And as the sun slipped beyond the hills, the lonely cowboy finally realized that sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't land or gold. It's the people you're meant to meet, the lives you're meant to protect, and the home you never knew your heart was searching for.